Every time people say to me, high five, and I'm like, no, I'm not happy with this. I hate government, whatever. And I did campaign for Donald Trump. I'm friends with Larry Kudlow and Stephen Moore.
George had 5 CIOs, and he actually chose one of them because the guy was a Republican WASP from Connecticut. He wanted someone who thought differently from him. That was a guy named Keith Anderson. Keith was a founder of BlackRock.
I have a friend who I moved from Chicago to Southwest Florida. My friend moved down here. One of the main reasons was because on the gun application in New York, self-defense is not a legitimate reason to get a gun permit in New York City.
And the head trader at the time was a guy named Kevin Dan. Kevin Dan, he's actually a partner at Soros. He was an old school Texan, guy from Jefferies actually originally.
How much of that do you think still permeates in the market? Obviously, we talk to quite a few high net worth individuals on this show, but also some retail traders who are still convinced to this day.
Now probably $50 McDonald's easy. Can you tell the butter story? Welcome to The Future's Edge. I am Jim Iuorio. That's Bob Iaccino. Today we have Derek Wallis, who is the author of an absolutely hysterical book called Occupy a Job on Wall Street. Before we start, Derek, where's the best? The best way to get in touch with you is to buy the book and get a review, do a review. But are you on Twitter? Can they follow you there? Do you have a website?
Substack is probably best. And that's just under my name, Derek Wallis.
Good. And
it's probably best.
Bobby, can you keep that book in front of your face for the rest of the show? Sometimes your face, it makes me sick.
Haley, our producer, was good enough to add Finance Unfiltered to our original name, and I think that's kind of taken over what the name is.
Yeah.
I just want everyone to see how special I am because this is not for resale. Now, the book is actually now on sale, but I have a damn autographed copy. Where's the autograph?
Fantastic.
There it is. So that's
okay, now before we get started, normal beginning. Remember, Bobby and I were 25 years in legacy media. We didn't fit in legacy media because we tended to tell the truth. And we always were the victim of some overzealous producer or sponsor who told us what we could and couldn't say. We want to create a platform where we can say wherever the hell we want to say. And we want to drive legacy media into the dust. At least I do. And then the headline today is CNN that's going to be firing like a quarter of its staff. Makes me happy. Makes me happy in here. None of this works without you people and your support. You guys have been wonderful. Please subscribe on YouTube. Please press the like button. Please subscribe to our go to our website. For our sponsor, Hardcore Italians. They're an awesome sponsor. It's getting close to Christmas. Perfect gifts for an Italian near you. Derek, tell us about yourself before we start. Where are you located?
I live in New York City. The accent is from what I call Australia's Canada, which is New Zealand. It's sort of like the useless country next to Australia. I came here 24 years ago as a backpacker. I had one friend, a guy you would have to invent, named Rocky Ramundi. He was lived in Tom's River, evangelical Christian. He was a fireman in New York City. And I lived on his couch to the displeasure of his wife. And I would come in, he'd work these 48-hour shifts and I'd interview and put out my resume and go talk to people. And then I was struck by lightning. February 2000, I got a job working for George Soros. Didn't know what a hedge fund was. Didn't know who George Soros was. My job was to walk around and pick up. You guys are old school guys. White and pink paper tickets. Pink for sell, white for buy. And a month after I arrived, Druckermere blew up the firm. They fired everybody. Nobody knew I was there, and I ended up staying 13 years. So that was, 2 years was a good stint at Soros. They had a lot of turnover. Left in 2013, launched my own investment fund with a couple of other Soros guys. I was there another 10 years, and then I joined a global macro firm called 33 Capital out of Greenwich. Wasn't quite the right fit for me. Love those guys. They're doing great this year. So I ended up finding my replacement and leaving Wall Street, at least for now, and writing a book.
Fantastic. Bobby, do you want to take this? We can go to the funny stories of the book because the book had me in stitches. But we got to, as a market expert too, your call. Where do you want to go the first part of the show?
I want to start with the book. And if I could.
The book's great.
Yeah, I want to start with the book because the book itself. So many people, Derek, when I tell them what I do or people who know what I do, They'll be like, oh, Bobby, I thought of you. I watched Wolf of Wall Street yesterday. And I'm like, stop saying that to me, seriously, because a lot of that stuff happened, just not all in one day, like they make it seem in
Sure.
that movie, right? It just seemed like every single day was like that. So one of the things I wanted to ask you first, you got a job with George Soros. In the book, you come across as having been much more left-leaning in your early days. Don't care what you are now. I don't really care what you were then either. I'm just curious because obviously you know the reputation of George Soros. Was that one of the questions? Like, did you feel when you were being
Never.
interviewed if
So
there was any sort of political lean toward the interview?
no, what's the quote that if you're young and conservative, you have no heart. If you're old and liberal, you have no brain, right?
Churchill. Yeah.
Or no
So
money.
look, George and I
Right.
don't share politics. I think we did earlier in, but that never actually came up in the firm. There's two parts to, what will end up being the Soros legacy, and one is the hedge fund. And to give you an idea of when I was there, George had 5 CIOs, and he actually chose one of them because the guy was a Republican WASP from Connecticut. He wanted someone who thought differently from him. That was a guy named Keith Anderson. Keith was a founder of BlackRock, lovely guy, old school Republican. And so there was never really, I would say most, you know how trading desks are.
Hmm.
Most of the trading desk, I would say, were libertarian conservative. Then you have open society, and I have my theories on open society. The short theory is simply that if you have an unlimited pool of money to ostensibly be a bunch of do-gooders, who do you think works in places like that, right? So my speculation is that George has absolutely no idea who the DA in San Francisco is. But George is also 93 and, probably has someone cutting up his steak for him and, the blood of virgins running through his arm too, right? So, but no, it never, very rarely or never came up.
So Bobby, can I have a quick
Yeah,
follow-up
go,
there?
Jim.
So what you're saying right now is all this tale we are told, and I live in just outside of Chicago, and our DA, Kim Fox, was a Soros Act Blue
Sure.
candidate as well. So the theory being, then I have believed it until this moment, in that he, for some reason, wants to get these DAs in place who don't enforce crime, something about the fourth turning, break it down to build back better. You think that's all bullshit and he has no idea
No,
about that?
I'm not going to go that far. I lean libertarian myself. I'm a concealed carry holder in New York City. Help other people get concealed carries. Been a big supporter of our military veterans for a long time. One of the big weaknesses of the left in the last call it 8 years has been saying, well, Trump thinks this or is this, and nobody knows what Trump thinks, right? At all, right? I think a lot of people, he's been made out to be a boogeyman that he probably isn't. Now, I live in New York City? Do I like these policies in the city? Absolutely not. And so I understand where people are coming from. I would say this is probably more of an open society issue than it is a George Soros issue. If you think a lot of the earlier policies that he had, very anti-Iraq war, very anti-communist, pro legalization of drugs, which you can easily argue has gone too far. These I think probably been borne out by history. Now, has the left gone too far? Everybody understands the left has gone too far, right? I mean, they've convinced everybody except for the voters, right?
Does the left think they've gone too far too? But Bobby, you take the question.
Yeah, no.
Nobody knows what the left thinks either.
Yeah. So it's funny you say that. I want a couple comments to what you just said. Our friend James Fishback, who is an advisor to Vivek Ramaswamy, he's become a friend of mine at Jim's and a friend of the show. He said about Trump, take him seriously, but not literally. And I thought that was one of the best ways to describe Donald Trump and the things that he says publicly.
And the flip side is the left takes him literally, but
Right.
not seriously.
Right.
Yeah.
So based on that, I want to kind of reference the book, page 76. If there's a lesson to this story, it's better to have a hot head than cold feet. Also, mental illness is arguably a sane response to an insane world. I dog-eared that because I think based on what you've said, and again, you arguably lean quite a bit more left at the time of the book the time period that the book is set in than you do now. Do you think that's kind of what's happening to sort of the youth? Is insanity is sort of a response to an insane world? Number one. Number two, how the hell did you become a conceal and carry holder in New York? I have a friend I moved from Chicago to Southwest Florida. My friend moved down here. One of the main reasons was because on the gun application in New York, self-defense is not a legitimate reason to get a gun permit in New York City.
So well, the reason I am able, so I've been a firearm owner since 2006, and this is the sort of mugged by reality. I believe that was Katrina that pushed me, to the point where I thought, there may be a time when no one's coming to save you, right? And the Supreme Court changed the rules last year. So the moment they changed the rules, I applied immediately. Since then, I've been helping people, get their concealed carry. Probably early next year, if you're a concealed holder in the 35 sane states, you'll probably be a concealed carrier in New York soon as well. So we'll see what happens with that.
All right, so I'm going to go back to the book again. A couple of questions I'm asking about in the book, by the way, to the audience that are designed to make you buy it, only because some of these stories are just fantastic. But on page 99, you don't have chapter numbers, but the chapter is Traders, Guns, and Money, December 2005. Trading thrives on information, more specifically disinformation, misinformation, and inside information. This book contains a certain amount of disinformation, inaccurate data shared deliberately. And then you go on to talk about Nick Leeson's ledger. How much of that do you think still permeates in the market? Obviously, we talk to quite a few high net worth individuals on this show, but also some retail traders who are still convinced to this day, as you told in another story later in the book, that there's traders out there just buying one lot of crude oil at $100, trying to trigger stops, right? Seeing if they can trigger stop and setting off a chain effect, which I want to ask you about later in the show. How much of that do you think is still absolutely permeates the market?
You mean people forcing sort of self-fulfilling prophecies, right? Driving things absolutely. In order to drive things. Oh, I think those drive the market constantly. I don't know if that fits into any of those three buckets, right? I think that's a legitimate way to trade as well. Like, why not? If you're a whale and you can force, how many whales do you think were forced out of the Tesla short? Yeah, no, I think that's legit. Do I think that there is an enormous amount of fraud or inaccurate by companies? I'm not sure. I don't know if you've ever come across Tom Kurtz, but Tom he writes whenever he feels like writing. He was an old school Lehman Brothers guy, and he said one of the things he likes about charts and markets is they don't lie, right? Managements all lie, but charts don't lie. And one of the reasons I think we've been in a multi-year bull market is the fact that a lot of the worst behavior was squeezed out during the financial crisis, and in 2002 with Enron and everything else. So most, I would say, the S&P are probably, it's pretty legit. I think it's very difficult to get one over on regulators and less about regulators with investors. I think there's just too many hands in the market. Yeah, I'm not but no, do whales drive markets? Absolutely. I'm sure that still goes on.
And it's legit, you said, because and I agree with you. If you look at a chart and you know where the stops are going to be just based on the way the chart looks, run those stops out. That break the stops. I see that all the time. And when I'm about to put a stop in, I always say to myself, no shit, they're going to know that level's a stop. So I'll put it here or set it after they run it, right?
Yeah, and look, I've at Soros, I worked for 5 CIOs and over 70 portfolio managers, and you would get these orders, and they'd say, look, go buy 1 million shares of XYZ at $50, and I'd say, don't buy it at $50. Buy it
at 48.
50.1 or 10 cents above always, because you're buying alongside 30 other who cares if you pay 10 cents more for it, right? Get the stock, and if you're selling something and it's breaking, sell that, it's going to drive in more sellers, so yeah, I think that's, but again, I think it's legitimate. I think the market is the sum of all information that's out there, and I don't see any reason why you shouldn't drive stops.
So one of the things Jimmy mentioned, that we were sort of forced out of legacy media. I left voluntarily, and therefore my story is not as good as Jim's. He can tell it again, or he can tell you on the side. But Jim, they basically told him to get out, and he basically said, "No, let's talk about it. Pay me more, and I'll stay."
No, I'll just let me a quick aside. I kept getting emails from the TMZ of financial networks that I worked for 18 years, whatever. And toward the end, they were telling me what I could and couldn't say about macroeconomic policy, not just about anything that they perceived to be political. And it was getting really weird in 2016. So we kept getting these emails, and there was two people that the emails were supposed to, everyone would call me and the other guy who's someone you know who happens to have a ponytail and say, you guys are the ones who are you're pissing them off. Why don't you stop? And I'm like, fuck that, I'm not stopping. But at the end, the conversation with the executive producer was, and I said, no, stop right there. I said, I'm not saying my integrity isn't for sale. I'm saying you're 2 zeros too short. I thought that was really funny. Turns out they did not think it was funny at all. And I knew that our relationship was going up in flames. Anyway, Bobby, back to your question.
You guys must be doing cartwheels after this election. I mean, if for no other reason, the repudiation of the mainstream media has been.
Yes, I am, but I'm not proud of the fact that I am, and I keep answering that question with a lie. Every time people say to me, you know, high five, and I'm like, no, I'm not happy with this. I hate government, whatever. And I did campaign for Donald Trump. You know, I'm friends with Larry Kudlow and Stephen Moore. But yes, deep down, I am elated because of the punch to the nards. And we're trying to bring back the word nards on this show, too, by the way. So if you can work that in at any time, we'd appreciate it.
Like balls, nards.
Yeah, good. The
balls
shot
just
to the nards of legacy media, I think, is hysterical. And I want to drive them out of business. I want the executive producer from that station to be getting my dry cleaning at some point in time. There.
Funny question, actually. Is there a New Zealand colloquialism for genitals of the male species? Because there's a lot here, and there's a
I mean, the funniest thing about New Zealand colloquialism is that if you call someone a cunt, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
See, I won.
No, it's like one of your pals sometimes too, right?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. So that's there's a bunch of my favorite New Zealand expression is calling somebody a black catter. And a black catter is someone whose cat is always blacker than yours, right? So it's, so it's like, I've got this kind of car. Well, I've got the latest model or whatever it may be. But a black catter, I've always liked that.
I'm using that tonight at dinner.
Fantastic.
So I want to explain to people that, like, the joy of this book is chapters are basically 2 to 5 pages long, and they're all just stories. And Derek, I found myself at times going, there's no way this one isn't embellished. What percentage of this is true? Names are changed, but what percentage of this, like, was there any sort of artistic license at all? Because I'll tell you a story when you're done answering that there's no artistic license in, just to give people an idea.
So everything in the book happened to some extent or another. What the qualification is that in order to protect identities, and the names are changed, of course. And then the other one, which is, my friend Tom Morgan's, always at me that he considers sort of almost a form of dishonesty, but it's an autobiographical novel. So the characters are composites to some extent.
Okay.
So if Billy Irish, so for the audience, the story follows from the years 2000 to 2013.
Can I stop you for one quick second? I think you're Billy Irish. That's my theory, but go ahead.
There's two characters. There's a buy-side trader that's loosely based on myself, and then there's another character, Billy Irish, who is a sales trader, one of my sales traders. So my Billy Irish is probably 40% one person in particular. The rest is 20 other people. Like, we used to call my crew the circus. It's really the circus crew. And myself, I have a 15-year-old daughter, so everything's been taken down a notch in the book. I would say, 60% me and 40% 4 or 5 other buy-side guys that had very similar jobs to me and were in the room at the same time. There's nothing in there that didn't actually happen because, you couldn't also make this stuff up, I don't think. The truth is always, far funnier than fiction.
So
I'm not that good a writer,
I'm going to tell this story, Jim, real quick. And I told this story before. I don't think I know you weren't present when it happened. But just to give people an idea of the kind of stories that are in this book, I went down to the Chicago Mercantile Members Club one night or one afternoon, right? So Chicago, the market's closed, and the markets Jim and I were in together when we got to know each other at 2:30 Central Time, 2:00, but we were always down there till at least 2:30. 3:30, I went down to the members club, right? And I went to grab myself a drink, and there was a table of guys, and they were laughing and yelling, and I'm like, they can't be drunk yet, right? So I walked over to one of the guys. I just call him Fear. That was actually his badge. All right. And I walked over to one of the guys that said, what is going on right now? And the other guys I'm not even going to come close to mentioning, right? He said, well, he has a margin call and he doesn't want to get out of the position. He's asking me for the money. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I walk away, go have my drink. Then I see them all hooting and hollering and screaming outside. The guy who needs the money has agreed to jump off the Madison Street Bridge into the Chicago River with his pants down and a feather duster clenched in his butt cheek. And I remember the part of the story where one of them screams, where the fuck are we going to get a feather duster? And the guy goes, there's this Walgreens right across the street. They got to sell them. They ended up with like a Swiffer handheld or something. I don't know what it was. And I'm like, I literally thought I'm in the Twilight Zone. I thought I had one drink. I'm like, did I have 20 drinks? I walk outside. Sure enough, he starts taking his pants off. People are running because they don't know what's going on. There's just a naked guy now, right? And he literally clenches the feather duster in his butt, climbs up and jumps into the Chicago River. And I'm like, I can't even believe this is happening. He swims to the ladder on the shore, and one of the guy yells, how far did it go up? And he goes like this. He just points his forearm out. These are the types of stories that are in this book. And again, 3 to 5 pages per chapter. It's just, I mean, I was roaring reading this thing. Absolutely roaring.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, look, it started off, there were 150 of those stories. I started, idle hands get into mischief, and I was probably at Marlowe a little bit too long, my own hedge fund. And I started writing these short stories with a few other guys, and we were just relaying, things that had happened to us. I mean, the podcast got pretty popular. We have, I still have over 600 ratings on iTunes, and I've taken most of them offline. You can still find some of them. The worst stories have been perhaps gone forever. I'm happy to share them with you guys on the back end, maybe. But I kept I think the funnier ones stayed in. So yeah, I'm glad you got a laugh.
I'll tell just a quick one, the trading floor, because we were with 10,000 people, so similar experience to you. I'll tell a quick one, then you tell one of them from the book to match. Maybe the one about the guy eating the butter too, which I thought that was funny, and then I have a question as well. But me and my Bobby remembers one of my buddies and compatriots, John Murphy. Yeah. So about once a year, once every 2 years, some young person would make a claim about how much they could eat. One time it was $50 worth of McDonald's food. Another time it was 30 hard-boiled eggs. Another time it was drink a gallon of milk in a half hour. But I had a system. So people would come to us because we were generally the bookmakers, John and I. So we were like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do this in 15 minutes. I'm like, no, we're not. We're not going to do it in 15 minutes at all. We're going to do it next Monday. And we're going to drum up so much buzz about it on the trading floor that at least $25,000 is going to be bet. I want people coming up, because I bet against every time. I want people coming up to this guy every day between now and then going, hey, I bet on you. Hey, I bet against you. And I want him to get in his head, because I fully believe that butterflies in your stomach affected you come game time. And I probably won about 25 grand over a 5-year span with this method. The $50 McDonald's guy, Billy Hubbard was his name. Man, when it goes badly, you find out who your real friends are at that McDonald's, by the way. And it did go badly toward the end. Now probably $50 McDonald's easy. Can you tell the butter story?
I've been thinking about sharing another story, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
So not on the book, but a classic one. Most of my stories are short. I can probably do this in 2 or 3 minutes. So it may run a little
Take your time.
long.
It's about you. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I first got to Soros and was on the trading, there's this big trading floor, probably 30 people there. And the head trader at the time was a guy named Kevin Dan. He's actually a partner at Soros. He was an old school Texan, guy from Jefferies actually originally. It was a bit bewildering and things were a little bit crazy. And I soon found out that the brokers would take me out, pay for drinks. And so being a 26-year-old from New Zealand, I was out every single night. And so it didn't matter. Like anybody, my nickname was America's Guest. Anybody who would take me out, I'd go drinking with. And so I went out drinking with, it was a broker from CIBC, and we're talking, middle of 2000 here, and we're at she goes, where do you want to go? I'm like, take me to the Four Seasons, but we're just drinking pints. She was good value, this girl, and we were probably 6 or 7 pints down, and we're at the bottom of the Four Seasons, and the waiter would come over and go, you want food? We're like, no, just drinks, and we're drinking it. At the top of the stairs, an unnamed television celebrity turned up. She was pretty hot. She had a bunch of her hot friends there as well, and they were at the top of the stairs, and they kind of stood there and looked down, and everyone was staring at them because they were famous. And one of the friends missed her step, fell down the stairs, and had a full-on coke fit, right? Like coke coming out of her nose, like this. They call an ambulance, and then we finished off our beers. It was hilarious, and I went back to the back home. I lived in Brooklyn at the time, and went to school. Went to work the next morning, and I said to Kevin, I said, listen, your friend from television was at Four Seasons, and one of her friends had a coke fit, and the ambulance came and got her. And he goes, Kiwi, you're full of shit. I spoke to her last night. She didn't, she would have told me. And I felt like this big, and just being torn apart. And sure enough, turn on television, and this woman's on television, and she looks like she's been hit by a freight train. I mean, no amount of makeup can make her look normal. Her hair's stuck up the back, mascara's running. And he looks at the television. He's like, "Oh, Kiwi, you were telling the truth. Like all these girls went out and had a." And he goes, "Get me Art Hogan on the phone." Art Hogan was a Jeffries guy like him as well, and
we're friends.
Yeah. So Art can neither confirm or deny the story, but it's somewhere in the archives of this television show. So and Kevin calls up Art and says, "Look, you got an interview." At 10 o'clock, split screen trading floor, and this woman's going to interview him. And he said, you're going to say the word pelican 3 times in this interview. And Art goes, I'm not going to do that, Kevin. And Kevin goes, you are going to do that. He goes, because if you don't do it, and we were one of the biggest firms on the street, you're going to be cut off. And if you do it, a river of commissions is coming your way. So Art has to do it. We all get on the telephones. We're betting on the thing. And like, there must have been 10,000 people all glued to their screens, and Art's being interviewed, and she asks him, she goes, how what do you think of the market? And he goes, we think that the NASDAQ is forming a pelican formation. And she goes, what'd you say? And he goes, a pelican formation. You just swoop down and grab stock, right? And he's done it, right? But the reason that they called her the pelican is because she could take a full cock and balls in her mouth.
By the way, so the person interviewing him,
you ask Art about that story.
So my guess would be that I have a personal relationship with that person who was interviewing him. Would you guess that too?
You may or may not know who that person is.
Well, I bet I do. But I can't think of,
why don't we leave it there at least for now? Why don't we leave that there?
Okay.
Yeah. But you could see how that could be true, right, Jim?
Oh yeah, I see absolutely how it could be true. Yeah. Bobby.
Yeah. It's like now I just want to tell stories.
Again, our wives aren't watching this, right?
No, they don't watch this.
Okay, good.
Nobody watches this show. We have like 2 subscribers. Do
you actually, and this is to both of you, Jimmy is still on the floor, but it's not the floor that it was, right?
No,
and
that's true.
One of the things I missed about that is regardless of the sort of, I don't want to say unethical, because the floor was our floor, right? Where Open Outcry still existed, right? They still traded back and forth, face to face, Jimmy to me to Jimmy, right? And it was self-policing. And if you were shady, they punch you in the face and never trade you with you again. So,
yeah, sure.
It was very easy to sort of police itself. But there were so many quick-witted people in one place that when the stress wasn't at its highs, it was the funniest place in the world to work. There's still a video up on YouTube. If anybody wants to see it, you just Google who put this dick on my back, CNBC, right? And it was posted to YouTube.
I'm gonna write that down.
It was posted to YouTube 16 years ago. There was a juvenile thing that they would do on mine and Jim's trading floor. It was called sharking somebody, and they would do it to new guys. They did it to me my third day there, right? The guys would take trading cards exactly like this, okay? And they would rip it in the shape of a shark's fin. I can still do it. And then they would fold it, pinch it, and clip it to the back of a guy's coat. So he was walking around with this on his coat, right?
Yeah,
And then
sure.
all at once, again, during slow times, the guys would just start yelling, "Shark!" and pointing. And the guy who had this thing clipped to his neck didn't know and had no idea what was going on. And he'd be turning his head and looking around. And then everybody, like when he would finally realize and throw it out, everybody would go, "You're a loser." And they just start throwing stuff at him. It was sort of like
these floors were magical places.
Yeah, and it was like a mini
I remember coming down to
if you
to the New York
that,
Stock Exchange in 2001, 2002, and walking around, being showed around by and we were, these guys, our floor brokers were ecstatic that a client would come down and hang out with them and show the attention. I was really interested in the business. I wanted to know everything that was going on.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that these people could make markets and remember things, and it was amazing.
The shark phenomenon, Derek, morphed into spurs and balls. So a dick, I'm sorry. But the spurs thing, guys would actually form sets of spurs out of these trading cards and attach them with tape to guys' heels when they weren't looking. And then people would do this sort of hee-yah thing until the guy realized he had spurs on his shoes. There was one time where somebody did a male, I already said dick, so a dick, right? And they put it on the guy's back.
With the nards too, or just
the dick? So the guy walked behind Scott Cohen, who was doing Scott Cohen from CNBC, who was doing an interview. And he literally walked by 2 or 3 times with this thing, they painted the top red, the whole thing. And he's walking behind Scott Cohen 2 or 3 times. And the last time he walks by, he grabs it and in the microphone goes, "Who put this dick on my back?" And it's still on YouTube.
It is still on YouTube. It's beautiful.
It's just
I mean, this sort of like mild, harassment, toughened you up, and the, a certain amount of peer pressure and, hazing. I don't want to overdiagnose this, but that, there's a problem that this doesn't exist. I mean, what 70% of the country's obese now? Someone should have told them 10 years ago, you're fat shit, don't eat that.
Yeah,
we would have.
We would have. That's right.
I was talking to some friends. This is 10, 15 years ago, and I talked about the early days of trading floor, how whatever your weakness was, they would zero in on it, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You would get pummeled for your weakness. And we're sitting at a table, and they're all like, "Well, what's your weakness?" I goes, "You guys got to be fucking kidding me!" And I stood up. I'm 5'8" tall. That is my weakness. So I have to be ready to fight everybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, look, the average height in America is 5'9". It's
not on a trading floor, to be clear.
Not on a trading floor. Yeah, I they would call me Dundee because if you're from New Zealand, it's insulting to be called Australian, right? And then they just settled on stupid. It could just call me stupid. Pick up the ticket, stupid. What's this, stupid?
Yeah, I want to go back to the book real quick because you mentioned something. There was something implicit in it in one of the paragraphs that I read twice. Is that sometimes I thought that the craziness that surrounded our trading floor and the trading rooms that you were in had to do with a hyper competitive, hyper intense, and it just would kind of blow off in steam. But I think the absence of women back in the day. The women sometimes keep us in line and keep us from acting like maniacs. And anyone's going to say this is some sort of gender. No, I'm literally complimenting women here. And when we worked in a trading room, the less women that were there, it seemed like the more idiotic we acted. Do you think that's an element of it?
Oh, it's clearly true. Look, testosterone is the dumb drug, right? I mean, testosterone makes men stupid and estrogen makes women more awful, right? Or the crazy drug to some extent. But yeah, there's all of life's like that, a balance to be pulled back and forth in one direction or another. We actually always, albeit like there was a brief period where there was no woman on the trading desk, but we actually always had women on the trading desk, and they were given a certain amount of deference as long as they didn't fuck up.
Yeah.
They fucked up. They both barrels just like everybody else, and that's the way they would have wanted it as well.
Yeah.
And they could handle themselves, and that wasn't some of my best brokers were women. I mean, my favorite, she's retired and she's in Saratoga now, but my absolute favorite person on Wall Street no question, was a woman named Sylvia Rocco. She was at Merrill Lynch 45 years. I mean, imagine being on the Merrill Lynch train desk 45 years ago. She started
Wow.
as an assistant, and she was tough as nails, and she loved her clients. People treated her with respect because she, she wouldn't have it any other way, right?
So on our trading floor, I think when you look at the board of trade and the CME, which now became one, three people in my mind stand out as like the trading floor legends.
I know one of them.
I'd say Tom Baldwin in the bonds, Don Wilson in the Eurodollar option, and Margie Teller. Margie Teller, who was a back month Eurodollar trader, and her mind worked faster than anyone else. And by the way, little side note, the first time I ever stepped into a futures pit was the Deutsche Mark to actually trade myself in the pit. First trade I ever made was with Margie on the other side. And the first time I ever walked into an options pit, the first trade I ever made was with Don Wilson on the other side of it. So I kind of feel that's a pretty good resume. But nobody even thought of Margie as a woman.
Lost on both trades.
I probably lost. I'm sure I lost on both. Don Wilson in the options pit, everything would be just going crazy, and you just wave him and say, "Don, can you make me the OC 45 whatever the put spread?" And he'll just be like, and it's as many as you want. Just everyone else will be going like, I'm at 5. I'm trying to hose you, and I was just like, okay, buy 5,000. So it was so easy to trade with him because he just figured out markets faster than anyone else. Margie was the same way. My point was going to be nobody gave two shits that Margie was a woman. Margie was just smarter than us. We were scared of her.
She was
terrifying. We were scared of her, and she ran. And everyone's like, "Oh, that's such a sexist environment." No. Well, it's a sexist environment if you're a woman and you suck. But if you're a woman and you're better than us, we have zero problem with giving deference to you and even paying homage. You find that?
Yeah, and look, the how sexist was it that you heap abuse on males all the time, right? Yeah. I mean, this is one of the most, not to get too off limit, but one of the most important books. There is I don't know if you've come across The Boy Crisis, but
who wrote that?
Can you put that in the center?
It's a guy named Warren Farrell.
Can you put that in the center?
It's called The Boy Crisis.
The whole thing.
Because I think it's a similar book to Richard Reeves' book, which is called Of Boys and Men, and it's probably the same shit they're talking about, which I think is a very serious problem.
Yeah, I mean, if we're a patriarchal society, we're a very strange one. I mean, women live 5-6 years longer than men. It was 2 years even 20 years ago. Asian women make, more money than white males. Men are 300% more likely to die in accidents. Women have been out, graduating from college in greater numbers than men since 1986.
Yeah, we're awful at this patriarchy thing. Yeah,
right.
We're bad at it.
What kind of, this is not a, the argument would be, well, the people on the top levers of power are male, and that may be true, but that's a tiny fraction of men. It's a classic quote, but most men live lives of quiet desperation. No one cares what happens to men, at all. Yeah. So anyway, we don't want to get too off topic on it.
Yeah. Before I ask you another question about the book, Margie was absolutely terrifying because of her brain. I mean, I knew I'd kick the shit out of her if I needed to, but she was just terrifying. Yeah. Like she would walk past me and I would just kind of not make eye contact because
that's exactly ruled the floor.
Terrifying, and it was she got nothing but respect. And even the women that were on the trading floor that they weren't involved in trading, they were there as clerks or something else. They didn't take our shit at all. They literally looked at us like little children.
They probably had to work twice as hard, to get there.
So we should talk about markets, but I want to ask you again, because I read this story and I've been doing this for coming up on 31 years now. Jim, about a little bit longer than me. Iceland, a guy in Iceland started the financial crisis.
Do you remember?
The book is Gunner. So go into that, because I read this. I'm like, I need this podcast to be today, because this part I did not know.
So, I mean, and so the financial crisis, was probably going to happen, anyway. There's inevitable, like a snowball running down a hill. But the epicenter of it was actually Iceland. So Iceland was the epicenter of the carry trade, at least in proportional way of looking at things. It was the largest meltdown of financial assets anywhere in the world. Essentially, what had happened is that, given the Iceland krona was the peak of the carry trade, and people were piling money. I think I describe it like coal into the Titanic's boilers. And these Icelandic banks got massive, and then they had to put the money somewhere, and eventually the whole freak show came crashing down. About a month before everything went to hell, there was an Icelandic guy worked for a large hedge fund. He actually wasn't a Soros guy, and he went to one of these conferences. I believe it was Merrill that had these executives from this large bank,
I think it was Merrill in the
and
book.
started asking them, strange questions. Like, I didn't know this about Iceland. Like, the Icelandic people believe in elves, right?
Yeah, that was in Michael Lewis.
So
okay,
fantastic.
right? And started asking them these sort of questions, and of course they could only stutter through the response, and there was probably 1,000 investors in there, wondering what these guys were doing with their assets, and this guy stood up. He was pretty autistic, or as my daughter would say, he was an autard, right? They're not very politically correct, this new generation, which is encouraging. There was a run on the Icelandic banks, and then that took down the entire financial system. Was it Gunnar that set this off? He was there. He asked the questions.
I mean, what a question.
Like,
what an unbelievable question. I read this in the book, and even if I had known that it started, Jimmy, did you know it started in Iceland? I didn't realize that was the first.
There's a Michael Lewis book, and they talk about the elves thing, and I think it's Michael Lewis, doesn't he?
Yeah. I don't know. I didn't read.
Does he talk about that as well?
You had to get a building.
This is the only place I'd ever heard that.
You had to get it certified elf-free. When you were building new construction in Iceland up until like the 90s, you had to get someone to come out there and make sure it was elf-free. Swear to God.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
crazy.
I was looking at one of the rules that the is it Millet, who's the Argentinian thing that's getting rid of is there's a rule saying that that every seventh son has to be sponsored by the government so they don't become a werewolf, right? and that's one of the things that he's getting rid of.
Good policy.
So, yeah.
I can't. When we stood up, do you guys still believe in elves? And they danced around the question. I had to put the book down. I spit my coffee out, and I'm like, I got just spectacular stories. I want to hit on one more thing, and I'm not going to go to the book, but there's two separate chapters in the book. One is a meeting that involved the best hedge fund manager in history. I think we all know who that is, Druckenmiller. And he basically, in the meeting, there was an agreement that he was going to talk it down on CNBC. It was crude oil. It was after the $100 one contract, I think it was. See if I can trigger some stops, and then we're going to drive it to 150 and that whole thing. And then the other one was your old boss, George Soros, one of his fund managers, I think it was the head of the trading room, had to tell him that you were down $400 million as a firm because he just talked about gold in a bubble.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I'm curious.
So the gold story is classic. The Drucker thing. Look, it wasn't me in that room,
right?
But it was somebody I know extremely well, and he told me that story, and I trust him completely. He was an famous in our circles, energy portfolio manager. The gold thing was hilarious. I mean, George would call up. Sometimes he'd call once a week. Sometimes he'd call once a month. Sometimes he'd call 15 times a day. It would depend. We were long an enormous amount of gold. This is a little post-financial crisis where we thought they were going to expand the money supply, and the gold seemed like an obvious place to put the money. Anyway, the one of Jim's old compatriots on the media asked George, I think he was on Davos or something like that, and said, look, we know you're long a lot of gold, and he didn't know. People weren't supposed to know that we were long a lot of gold, but we had so much gold that physical gold contracts that you just couldn't. We had to figure out other ways to buy it. So one of the things I did is on the equity desk was create, have the banks create ETFs to get long essentially gold. So we were most of the GLD at that time. And so, of course, we had a 13F filing, and people found out that we were long gold, and she, confronts them with it on television and says, we're long a lot of gold. And he said, what do you think of gold? He's like, well, gold, we think it's in a bubble. And then the rest of the conversation keeps going on, and gold's, of course, like, because, everyone knows we're long gold, and George thinks it's in a bubble. So the assumption is either we've sold it or we're going to sell it. And when he called up the trading desk and said, where's the P&L? One of the macro trader said, we're down $800 million, $900 million, whatever it was, we're $25 billion fund at that stage. And he said, oh, okay, well, why are we down? He was very, he'd never raise his voice. Nothing would ever upset him. He would never express surprise. He would just say, okay, why? He would say, well, gold's down, 8%, George, and it's a third of our fund. He's like, why is gold down? He had absolutely no idea. And the traders, he's a tough guy. He's like, George, you just on television. You just said it was in a bubble. What do you think's going to happen? You spoke and the market reacted. And he said, well, I said it was in a bubble, but I did not say it was going to burst. You buy 500 million of the gold. I mean, totally deadpan.
You guys,
and he was right. George liked buying.
you guys
bubbles.
got to buy this book. There are so many stories.
Yeah, I mean the rule of thumb, and I think it's a good one. Or maybe it's just a matter of being invested in the market at the right time. Is don't sell new highs. Right. The amount of money that I've left on the table, everyone leaves on the table by trading around, these positions too much,
Okay. So you mentioned the word bubble. I have been on this, like a tour of trying to explain to people that what really constitutes a bubble and why I do not believe anything is currently in a bubble. I just believe what we're seeing right now is a recalibration of the value of the dollar. It's 70% of what it was worth 3 years ago. So everything that you price in dollar is consequently higher, including the S&P, including gold. And the S&P might be above where it would normally be just based on that. But in order for it to be a bubble, and it's not even just the leverage, it is the type of leverage that has to filter down to people who cannot withstand a margin call. Like in The Big Short, when it was, a stripper with 5 homes, those were real stories. Do you concur that when it's just, there can't be an everything bubble because it doesn't represent the leverage and the margin that it needs to be?
And also relative to what? Have you ever seen the chart on global GDP?
Yep.
No.
Over time.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the chart itself it's this guy Marion Tupy that popularized this.
I know who he is. Yeah.
For the audience, birth of Christ, right, and world GDP in constant dollars, and it sort of looks like this: flat lines forever, and then inverts up, right, and the amount of wealth that's been created in the last 100 years, 200
Since the
years,
Industrial Revolution, right?
20 years, yeah. And the question is, where are you in that curve? And if you extrapolate out to the year 2100 using fairly conservative assumptions, so the global GDP growth from 2000 onwards is about 2.8%, and you could make the case that it'll be lower because of China and some other reasons, right? But you end up with a $250 billion, literally a meaningless amount of money, and not that long, in 80 years. The question is, where are you on that curve? I mean, I could make the case that we'll be growing. The US will be growing in the next 4 years. Well over 3%, right? That's
Wait,
just
was that
based
just
on
a political endorsement that you just gave right now? Is that what I just heard?
well, I never say who I vote for, but my daughter's not going to be competing against men in swimming. So
okay, good.
You're a citizen now from a long time?
Yeah, I'm actually the son of an American. My father was an Air Force officer, and went to go live in New Zealand, and I had a US passport, so I could come here, and that's probably worth just 30 seconds. Is I never wore a uniform, and this country's been really good to me. And since 2000 since Hillbilly Armor, so 2005, 2006, I've been doing fundraisers for our military families. I've done 12 fundraisers at the Intrepid, always for maybe 6 different fundraisers. I have a mentoring program for military veterans. Anybody watching this is a military veteran or knows a military veteran. I have a program that I put people through, help them find jobs on Wall Street, guide them through the process. And but this country's been incredibly good to me, and I'm forever grateful. So.
Before we move on, I want you to hit that again. Like, if people want to get involved, donate. We're good at raising money, and we're good at selling books. And this isn't just our opinion. We got data on this. We're good at raising money. We're good at raising money for good causes. What's it called again, and how can people get involved, and where can they find it?
I've been raising money for military veterans and hosting events at the Intrepid Museum since The first Intrepid event was 2009, I believe, so right in the middle of the financial crisis. I've hosted 10 or 12 of them. I only really support very small military charities. Every book, that I sell or give away comes with a bookmark for an organization called We Defy. We Defy is they take combat veterans and they sponsor them in jiu-jitsu, provide that community support and the physical challenge that a lot of these combat vets need. And they have chapters all around America. I think it's a wonderful organization. All the profits from my book go to We Defy. I'm hoping to host an event for them next September. I had an event for them at the Baylander, which is a boat up on the Hudson River a little while ago. Just an excellent organization. Last year we raised money for a organization called One More Wave, and they're spectacular as well. They create custom-made surfboards for military veterans, so amputees, and they'll take these guys surfing with Navy SEALs. Surf therapy is what they call it. So that's One More Wave. But I've raised money and supported a lot of organizations over the past, and I also have a possibly more meaningful. I have a mentoring program for military veterans, and I'll help them get jobs on Wall Street, make them introductions to people, walk them through the process. Sometimes it's real simple, like don't call people at 9:30. They're not going to want your phone call. But these guys don't know that. Right. Yeah, that's right. So it's been a big thing. It's been really rewarding. I've loved doing it. It's been phenomenal. And
Bobby, should I just mentioning that the proceeds from the book go to charity? Can I play us out now? Because I want to make that big pitch, because that is kick ass in my opinion. You ready? You done?
Yeah.
Are you done? You're not. You don't have anything else yet, right?
No.
Okay. His name is Derek Wallis. The book is called Occupy a Job on Wall Street. I've read half of it. It's fantastic. I can't wait to get to the other half of it. Just anecdotal stories that will literally have you in stitches. As Derek mentioned, proceeds from this book go to the charities that help support veteran military families. By the way, you guys have always been fantastic when we mention charities, when we mention foundations. But what's Carrie Ingram's foundation that she said you guys donated shit to us? Do you remember, Bobby? What's it called?
Yeah, it's called Discovery Institute's American.
Yeah, when we mentioned Discovery Institute and talked about it, you guys rushed to it and gave money to it. This is another thing to give money to. Please buy the book. Thank you guys for joining us. That's Derek Wallis, author of the book. I'm Jim Iuorio. That's Iaccino. Remember, none of this works without you. Right now, what's happened over the last couple weeks, in my humble opinion, which I never have a humble opinion, is that we are destroying legacy media. Nobody believed them. Everyone believed little independent journalists like us. I love it. I think they've overplayed their hand, and I think it's a bunch of bullshit. But none of it works without your support. We were 25 years in legacy media. It did not fit for us because we couldn't give our honest opinions. Thank you so much for supporting our sponsor, Hardcore Italians. Christmas is coming up. The gift for an Italian, a hardcore Italian, is one of these funny shirts. Go to the website, Hardcore Italians. This has been The Future's Edge. Thank you, guys.